introduce Jeremy Corbyn, founding supporter of the People's Assembly Against Austerity, chair of the Stop the War Coalition and MP for Islington North.
Friends, two things to start with, or three really. One is, first of all, thanks to everyone for being here and for those that have put a lot of effort into organising this event today and the strength and success of it. And also I'd like to put a personal thanks to the Haringey Cypriot Centre for letting us use their building today. And this building I've got very special affection for because in the 1980s I was a councillor at Haringey and we were deemed loony left, mad, crazy, any old abuse that suited, because we supported the principle of community centres for ethnic groups within the borough, of which obviously this centre is one of those for the Haringey Cypriot community. And the building was a former school, was due to be sold off, and by a bit of manoeuvring one night on the council's policy committee, the late Bernie Grant and myself managed to come out of the meeting with this building earmarked to be the Cypriot Community Centre. And it's still here. So I think it's one of those things that you go through an enormous battle and it turns out to be something of good for the community for a very long time to come. We stopped this being sold to the private sector. It would have made such nice luxury flats, wouldn't it? It would have been so nice, you know, but it's not. It's a community centre and that's great. The second thing is, as you're, I'm sure, aware that Tony Benn is not going to be able to be with us today. I'll read the message, which some of you may have seen, but I'll read it anyway because I think it's appropriate. Message from Tony Benn. Our campaigns for peace and justice will reach a peak as the election approaches. The key to our success will be the extent to which we broaden our campaign and have the confidence to fight. May the 1st next year should be when we fill the streets with different campaigns, demanding change and making it clear we intend to win. Tony Benn. That's the message he sent. And as you all know, Tony hasn't been too well recently. He suffered a bit of a stroke. I went to see him in hospital, 3 weeks or so ago, and spent an hour and a half, 2 hours with him. Every time he seemed to be getting tired, talking about history of politics, anti-war movements and everything else in this country, we sort of quietly were about to leave the room, at which point he woke up again and said, "Where are you going?" So we turned around and went back in again, and then we restarted our discussion of the 1950s, and as we moved through decade on decade, and we couldn't get away, which was wonderful. And I know Tony's suffered a lot. He is incredibly clear on his analysis of history and incredibly clear on what we have to do. And I think it would be nice if from this event we sent him our very best wishes, of course, as I'm sure we would. And since he mentions May the 1st, why don't we say we look forward to seeing him at next year's May Day rally, giving that clear socialist message that Tony has always given. I think it would do something to cheer him up, because his mind is there, the body is weak. That's the problem with age as much as anything else. Now then, this movement came out of that massive conference we had. This movement came out of anti-austerity movements in lots of other places. Think back over the immediate past. 2008, the banking crisis came along. And I remember being in the House of Commons when Alistair Darling, who was then the Chancellor, comes in and said there's been a bit of a problem with the banks. Okay, yeah. As a helpful measure, we put in some quantitative easing of £25 billion. So I'm sitting to the MP next to me, I said, "Did he really just say 25 billion? He said, "No, it was million." I said, "I'm sure it was billion." He said, "No, it was million." It was billion, it was million. No. So I got the statement, it was billion. Unbelievable. Suddenly, from nowhere, £25 billion appears as a money printing exercise. 25 billion appears as a supportive system for the banks, and that was just the down payment of all the other billions that went in after that. Now, I supported public ownership of the banks. I always would want banks to be public ownership or cooperative ownership, and that leads me to the point that I'm appalled, angry, sad, ashamed and disappointed that the Co-op Bank has now been handed over to a bloody hedge fund, for God's sake. It's our bank, not theirs. We should be able to keep it. But that nationalisation wasn't about taking the banks into public ownership. That nationalisation was about setting up a holding company to hold the shares temporarily in order to sell them on. So a primary demand, surely, is that instead of privatising or re-privatising Royal Bank of Scotland, HBOS Group or any of the others, they instead should be made into public enterprises with publicly set aims and objectives of how they operate, rather than going back to as they were before, putting money into dodgy places, loaning money to dodgy people, and paying their chief executive's telephone number, that's mobile phone number, salaries at the very least. I just think we've got to continue to make that demand. Then on the back of that, we had the austerity packages proposed, both sides of the election, and straight after the election in 2010, the Chancellor, Osborne, produced the emergency budget, which started off with £40 million taken straight out of the welfare budget, and so we've gone on ever since then, slashing public expenditure, leading to a greater gap between the rich and the poor, and a political objective of changing the whole culture surrounding the welfare state, the health service and the education service. Don't forget that in the back of all this sort of figures that Osborne and Cameron are keen on quoting, the reality is it's a political agenda to change the politics of this country, they hope, for all time. Take the three things I've mentioned. One is the principle of the welfare state. Now, I guess all of us in this room, over all of our lifetime, have argued for the principle of a society that prevents people falling into destitution. In other words, you have an unemployment benefit, you have a benefit that stops people falling into destitution, and you have a benefit system that helps people when they're going through a hard time and gives additional help to those with disabilities and special needs. We've all argued the case for that kind of society. But if any of you watch daytime television or watch reality television, we've had a steady drip for the last 2 years of programmes saying anyone on benefits equals scrounger, anyone on disability benefits equals big scrounger, anyone on disability benefits the highest rate equals enormous scrounger, and it's very important for the state to bear down on this. Now, the campaign against that has had some success, in that the government has now retreated slightly on disability benefits and delaying the introduction of PIP, only slightly. But I don't think we have won the argument anywhere in the public or the media that if you take away benefits on the basis that reality television says they're all scroungers, then you end up with a society with more people sleeping on the streets, more young people destitute, more homeless people, more absolute abject poverty of malnourished children underachieving in school because we're not giving the support they need in order to achieve something. Defend the welfare state is something we have to do, and argue the principle for it, and don't get defensive all the time on this business of benefit scroungers. Second, on the health service. They're saying there's no cuts in the health service. Wrong. Health service costs go up much faster than any rate of inflation or anything else, because the technology involved in healthcare is very expensive. I don't resent that, I recognise it's a need, and at the same time they are hollowing out the NHS by having the commissioning agents handed over to GPs, privatising services, requiring a very large level of private service. I'm constantly angry with Alan Milburn and most of the Labour Secretaries of State, not Frank Dobson, but most of the rest of them, for going along with that agenda which has been so damaging to our National Health Service. But people fight back. The Whittington Hospital isn't so far away, it's still got an A&E department, it's not been closed, the land hasn't been sold. Why? Because we met, we marched, we demonstrated, we put pressure on them, just like they're doing in South London, West London, and everywhere else. Demonstrations work, protest pays for the good of the entire community. And the third area is on education. I am totally committed to the principle of comprehensive education, free, alongside nursery education, higher education. We've been squeezed at both ends on education. University fees came in, the grant system virtually ended for most people, and at the other end, at the nursery level, fees have come in for under-school age children in nursery. So gradually there's a squeeze going on the education service. We had Building Schools for the Future, which I welcome in the sense that if we get a new building or improved buildings, fine. Why is it got to be done by Balfour Beatty, who virtually own the building and cream off the profits for the next 30 years through PFI, just as in the health service? And then we have the imposition of free schools, which is anything but free and anything but a liberation. The free school that's now being proposed on the Ashmount site on Hornsey Lane in Islington, where we had an excellent public meeting about that on Thursday. What's that about, other than handing it over to a Swiss-based education company that are in it probably as a loss leader in order to gain control of education in the future? Fight back against this nonsense of free schools and support state education run through the family of local authority education service. That is better for our children and a better form of education altogether. I don't want unqualified teachers teaching my kids. I don't want a school whose only interest is in the profit at the end of the day. I want a school run for the benefit of the education of all of us and the opportunities of all of us. Fight for it. It's important. If we don't, we lose it. The last point I make is this, because I feel the chair is agitating slightly. Yes, he is agitating. Matt's normally so calm as well. Shame, really. How do we win this thing? Well, in Greece, they formed massive campaigns against austerity. Syriza, as a party, came out of those campaigns against austerity, and it's politically changed an awful lot of things in Greece. And I say to those people in my own party, or indeed in equivalent social democratic parties all across Europe, those that have conspired with others to destroy the welfare state, as PASOK did in Greece, as PSOE did in Spain, what's the price they've paid? In the case of PASOK in Greece, which was once a major political force in Greece, was regularly getting a bigger percentage of the vote than the Labour Party's ever achieved in this country, it's almost complete obliteration. And the SDP in Germany seems to be accepting whatever price Angela Merkel throws at them in order to become part of a coalition with her. And so I think the message has to be that the social democratic parties that conspire with the austerity movements that cuts end up being destroyed as a result of it. The only way forward is to go back to your roots, support the principle of a welfare state, a public health service, and a publicly owned education service. And I'll conclude with this thought. Ed Miliband made a big deal at the Labour Party conference and since about the energy companies and their behaviour. He's right, I agree with him about that. It's absolutely outrageous what they're doing, the 10% price rise and all the other charges that they put. And the ludicrously inefficient nature of competition between 6 major energy companies, competition in quotes, where all the chief executives seem to get around £2 to £3 million a year each plus bonuses. It's the same gas that comes through the pipes. It's the same electricity that comes down the wires. They're not separately generating it. It's just a system of marketing that they operate. And he says freeze energy prices for 2 years. Okay. There's 2 flaws with that. One is at what level will they be frozen, because at what level will those prices be in 2015? And secondly, what do you do at the end of it? If he's moving in the direction of price control of energy, fine. Let's take the next fence and jump it very fast and very confidently, and that is take the energy services, all of which infrastructure was developed by public investment, back into public ownership. It's not unpopular any more than taking water back into public ownership or the entire railway system back into public ownership. The public are ahead of the politicians on this one, and let's get involved with the unions and all of those campaigns for public ownership and not be afraid to stand up for the principles of society that cares for all and ignores none, rather than one that ignores many and cares for a few. Thank you very much.